Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much for joining us today. We're delighted to have two very exciting and distinguished young leaders in the United States Congress. Delighted to have Richard Neal. Richie, good to see you. Chairman Kevin Brady from Texas, thank you for taking time to join us with an important part of what is regularly called an extenders package tax bill that would be very important as we near the end of the year. So once again, welcome back to the Rules Committee. Today, the committee will consider the Senate Amendment to H.R. 88, the Retirement Savings and Other Tax Relief Act of 2018. The Senate Amendment to H.R. 88 modifies and makes permanent the railroad track maintenance credit and extends and phases out the biodiesel and renewable diesel credit. The amendment also provides special rules allowing access to retirement funds, temporary suspension of limits on deductions for charitable contributions, allowance of deductions for personal casualty, disaster loans, special rules for measurement of earned income for the purpose of qualified for tax credits, and for special credit to employees and individuals and businesses affected by Hurricane Florence and Michael, other typhoons, California fires, volcanic eruptions, and earthquakes, a number of things that have caused displacement of people's lives, homes, jobs across the United States of America. Additionally, this amendment helps businesses provide retirement plans to their workers and helps families to start savings earlier and allows new businesses to write off more than initial startup costs. This legislation builds upon critical reforms seen in H.R. 1, which was a tax bill we did December, almost a year ago. I think it's December 17th or 18th last year. All across our country, our constituents and small businesses are benefiting. Economic growth and development is breaking out all across the United States, and as a matter of fact, reform needs to continue. Also, certainty needs to continue, and there are a lot of people who are seeking opportunities not just to be in this bill, but actually for us to have a tax circumstance that benefits America and keeps us strong and prepared for tomorrow. So I am delighted that both of you are here. I've looked forward to this as we do at the beginning of the year, each year when you would come back, grace us not only with your presence, but talk to us about the things that will empower more Americans to not only benefit through tax policy, but to make sure that economically we build the middle class of this country to allow them to have opportunities. Before we go any further, I want to yield time to the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, not you yet, Mr. Neal, but the other distinguished one. Yeah, that guy, the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's great to be back. Last week when I was home in my district, I participated in a 43-mile walk to raise awareness about hunger and to raise money for the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. I got shin splints to prove it. We stopped at various food pantries and shelters along the way and met with countless hardworking American families who, even now in this holiday season, are struggling to put food on their table because we have a food insecurity and hunger problem in this country. Yet here we are considering yet another bill that doubles down on the abysmal Republican tax scam that showered benefits on the rich, a plan that added nearly $2 trillion to the deficit and endangered the future of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And this is after we considered tax scam 2.0 last month. So the third time isn't a charm, Mr. Chairman. It's an outrage. This 300-page giveaway to the wealthy was drafted in the middle of the night and behind closed doors. Democrats, is what I've been told, were not consulted. There's no CBO score. There wasn't even a hearing or a markup on this bill. It's a hasty attempt to jam something through for the Republicans' wealthy allies before they're ushered out of power in January. And this is at a time when the government is about to run out of funding. We are 6 legislative days away from a possible government shutdown. 6. There are 7 appropriations bills left to sign into law. Why is the majority spending what little legislative time we have left on a bill like this instead of trying to keep the lights on. President Trump continues to threaten to hold the nation hostage to his immoral and expensive border wall. I remember when he promised that Mexico was going to pay for it. But now, if the taxpayers aren't put on the hook, we're facing another Republican shutdown. And we still have to renew priorities like the National Flood Insurance Program, the Farm Bill, and the Violence Against Women Act. So we have more important things to do, and it's long past time that the majority stop their obsession with tax cuts for their wealthy corporate friends. And I think it's time for us to get our priorities in order, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Well, we're going to have a healthy debate today. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Neal, I outlined to us what I believe is a realistic proposal about why we've included so many people in here at a time when it's not just the taxpayer, but actually probably individuals through their contributions that they would make in their own community, doing things that would allow a disaster-related tax relief. I don't consider that for millionaires. I consider that for real live Americans who are having problems. Mr. Brady had an opportunity to go through just south of him a massive hurricane some time ago that still he's a part of, and I'm delighted, Mr. Brady, that you listened to people and understood it. I'm sorry it happened in your backyard, to where it had to gain your attention, to where you understood that real live people would be suffering. So I just want to balance out some of this. It's not about millionaires. This is not a gift. This is a common sense, heartfelt opportunity. I think, Mr. Brady, a man who was deeply touched. I watched the tears in your eyes. I watched you fight over trying to do the right thing when the government funding did not come, and the fight about that took place. And now we're trying to say, how about people allowing them to make contribution to that out of their own pockets? So I guess that's just going to be a fight today. So, Mr. Brady, we're delighted that you're here. I've already taken time with the distinguished chairman to let him know some of my ideas, but I am delighted and quite honestly proud of your ability to be a kind soul and to not say no to wildfires, to not say no to hurricanes and typhoons, to not say no to people who are trying to make it happen, and to recognize that this matter is vitally important for Americans who are trying to come back and make their communities stronger and safer. So that's what I think. Yeah, I guess you knew that before you walked in. So distinguished young chairman is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the Rules Committee. Thanks for allowing me to testify today for you on what I think is a very important bipartisan bill. And I want to start by thanking you, Chairman Sessions, for your over 20 years of service to our great state of Texas in the People's House, your leadership of the Rules Committee and the way you do it in a civil, respectful, polite manner, letting everyone have their say as we debate these issues, and I could not be prouder of your service. So the United States economy is booming. Unemployment's at the lowest level since 1969. Our economy, GDP, is clocking at 3% year over year. That hasn't happened in a decade. And wages are rising at their fastest pace in a decade. So I think it's important Republicans and Democrats work together to keep our economy moving forward. That's why I introduced this package of tax and oversight policies to ensure we continue to build on this economic success in a bipartisan way. Each of these proposals have received the support of Republicans and Democrats in both the House and Senate. This bill will make a big impact for our communities nationwide. First, this package will help our families and workers save more and earlier throughout their lives. Makes it easier for local businesses to offer their workers retirement plans. It makes sure for the first time that our workers who are 70 and a half won't have to take money, forced to be taking money out of their savings, up to $50,000 accounts, so they can continue to save through their lifetime. And for the first time, young families will have a new baby savings option, so that when they welcome that new baby or that new adoption, like we did, you got medical expenses, new medical equipment, maybe you just want to stay home, for a month or two. Ability to dip into your retirement temporary to fund that important part of your life, be able to replenish it and no penalty. Also, we are including the American Innovation Act to spur more business startups here in the United States as well. We are working in a bipartisan manner with the Senate, so we've reached solid common ground on our efforts to redesign the IRS. Our IRS redesign, led by Lynn Jenkins of Kansas and John Lewis of Georgia, received near unanimous support in the House earlier this year. Won the bill's 414-0. So this reins in the abuses of the IRS, protects poor and low-income taxpayers, requires the IRS to bring back a restructuring of its agency focused on taxpayers first, and creates a new independent appeals process. So taxpayers aren't considered guilty till proven innocent. So there's a level playing field for that. I think it's time to send these reforms to the President's desk to ensure the IRS is an agency with one singular mission: quality taxpayer service. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, it's been a tough year for America when it comes to natural disasters. We've seen cities in Texas and Florida, California, the Carolina, dozens of other places absolutely destroyed by wildfires and hurricanes. In California alone, 17,000 structures, homes and businesses, thousands more in the Carolinas and throughout the United States. Coming from Houston, who's still recovering from Hurricane Harvey, I can say firsthand that rebuilding is tough. Communities can't do it alone, which is why this bill offers temporary tax relief to families in cities that have been impacted by the wildfires in California, helps communities hit by Hurricanes Michael and Florence, as well as by storms and volcanoes in the Pacific. Our bill will allow victims to immediately access funds from their retirement accounts penalty-free, so that they have a chance to move quickly on recovery and rebuilding, ensures that losses from these disasters will be deductible above the line. The bill gives our small businesses a hand in keeping their employees on their payroll while these communities work to get their economy back up and running, and encourages more charitable donations at a time when every community needs it. Together we can, we will, we should help these communities rebuild now. It's urgent. Another matter, temporary tax policy is rarely ever good policy. Our tax code needs to reflect that. This bill includes some permanent resolutions to what Washington calls extenders, and so an incredibly important step forward in providing certainty for our local job creators. Working closely with the public and members on both sides of the aisle, we've identified minor technical corrections to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Technical corrections are a pretty normal part of the legislative process. For example, when President Reagan and Chairman Rostenkowski last worked on tax reform in 1986, there were over 250 technical corrections. That's natural when you rewrite the entire tax code. These may be simple, but they are important changes to ensure our new tax code works as intended by Congress. In closing, I want to reiterate these policy proposals have the support of Republicans, Democrats in both chambers. It'll have a meaningful impact for families and businesses. So I look forward to swift action in the House so we can send these measures to the Senate soon. With that, Mr. Chairman and members, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Neal?
Thank
Light
you,
of the chair, gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member McGovern. And like Chairman Brady, I want to thank you, too, for your many good years of service to this institution. Let me start by saying that I oppose the bill. Last December, we sat in these two chairs to debate the Republicans' massive unpaid-for tax bill. A year later, we're back to alter it. A year ago, Democrats and independent experts warned that the so-called tax reform plan that is heavily skewed to benefit the wealthy and large corporations would not necessarily enhance our economy, and it would portend great damage for important programs like Medicare and Social Security. So now the writing's on the wall. Republicans, including President Trump's chief economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, have already called for new cuts to Medicare and Social Security. Republicans seem only to care about tax cuts for the wealthy, big corporations, even if that means cuts to vital programs for American families. Last year, the GOP crafted this tax bill behind closed doors and hastily passed it without a single hearing. That's contrary to what Mr. Rostenkowski, Speaker O'Neill, and President Reagan did. And because of that rushed process, there are a tremendous number of problems with the law which we called out at the time. Now, a year later, Republicans are back rushing through another package that doubles down on the original law's skewed benefits for the wealthy. This without a single hearing on the merits of these changes. There are many proposals in this legislation that I indeed do support. We should have been notified as to when this was going to happen, how it was going to happen, and what the procedures were in the run-up to this vote. A rushed and lopsided process resulted in an ill-considered tax law, and now our Republican friends want to duplicate that process with these changes. It's critical that the Ways and Means Committee return to the regular order, and one of the priorities for the next Congress will be to have oversight hearings on this tax law. Before making any changes, we'll examine each fix thoroughly, whether it is substantive or technical. That's how I think that we can avoid many of the kinds of problems that we're witnessing today. Another reason I oppose this bill is because of the disaster provisions. 2 months ago, when the Ways and Means Committee marked up so-called Tax Reform 2.0, we offered an amendment to ensure that the victims of natural disasters nationwide would be eligible for disaster tax relief regardless of where their communities were located or who their members of Congress might happen to be. Unfortunately, because of opposition to that amendment, it failed. Now, while I'm pleased today that this bill does include relief to victims of some of the most recent disasters our nation has endured, I disagree with the approach taken by our Republican colleagues here. Since Tax Reform 2.0 markup, there have been more than 13 disasters nationwide. Today's bill only provides relief to a fraction of the Americans who have suffered through these tragedies. The survivors of disasters shouldn't have to beg Congress for the next relief in the darkest hours of their lives. This, indeed, is the national principle. We should not turn our backs on our fellow Americans who need help the most. We should provide a path for them to get back on their feet. I'm also opposing this legislation because it's not offset. For the third time this year, Republicans are asking for a significant change to the tax law without paying for any of it. In fact, and egregiously, is, in my judgment, an act of fiscal malpractice. The GOP actually removed bipartisan efforts from the retirement section of this legislation. And I know this is a place where we could have found common ground. Today's bill once again demonstrates that Republicans are not the party of fiscal conservatism. And let me conclude, though, on a high note. The bill being considered today does include one package of provisions that is bipartisan and bicameral. Chairman Brady noted it, the IRS redesign provisions known as the Taxpayer First Act. The IRS package is a model as to how this entire process should have taken place. The Oversight Subcommittee, led by Chairman Jenkins and Ranking Member Lewis, have worked together openly and tirelessly on IRS redesign provisions this entire year. In March, Chairman Jenkins and Ranking Member Lewis released the discussion draft of the Taxpayer First Act, soliciting comments from stakeholders. In mid-April, the Ways and Means Committee marked up and passed the legislation. The House then considered and passed the Taxpayer First Act about a week later with a vote of 414-0. The House then began discussions with the Senate on ways to combine this bill and other IRS-related Senate bills. This was a collaborative process that resulted in a collaborative product, which included priorities of the House, the Senate, Democrats, and Republicans. It's a shame that the entire bill before us today was not constructed in a similar manner. For these reasons, I plan to oppose the bill on the floor later this week. Thank you again for the invitation here today. And, Mr. Chairman, I beg your indulgence. The Democrats are picking their leadership team, and so at this juncture, I'd like to be excused for that purpose.
Would you like me to go for you?
Pardon?
Would you like me to go for you?
Well, you know, I think given what we're doing, I think I could probably go to the leadership meeting.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
That does not bother me, and I would hear from the others. That does not bother me, but there will be discussions about you, and I would like the same latitude to say that I did not, that we extended the courtesy upon your suggestion that you needed to leave. So obviously, we will take a different perspective, so I don't want you to say, well, I picked on you when you weren't here. So as long as we can agree to that, that's fine.
In my absence, you should feel free to pick on me.
Well, that's not my point. That's,
Wait, let me make a note of
Mr.
that.
Neal, both you and I know each other. That's not what this is about. It's all policy. It's not personal.
Yeah, that's,
Understood.
It is not personal, but I'm simply suggesting, I would do that, but you recognize that we would still reserve that right.
Fully understood.
Yes, sir. Mr. Neal, I see no objection from the committee. We want to thank you very much. You'll be welcome back in next Congress in a different role. And while I will not be here to welcome you, I want to wish you continued success in that endeavor.
And we wish you well, Mr. Chairman.
I know you do, and it's been a fun ride for both of us. But I wanted to be honest about that. It would not be personally, but it would be opposition.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
If you want to send along your criticisms, I'll be happy to tangentially respond.
Yes, sir. Now, if you would please, we have an awesome stenographer here. Anything that you brought in writing would enable her to complete the record properly. If you could leave it, as you choose to leave anything.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm asked your indulgence as well. I've been,
The Democratic Caucus.
no, not to that one. I've been called away to a meeting. Mike Kelly, who leads the Family Savings Act, key member of this committee who helped develop this legislation, is here to testify on our behalf.
Mr. Brady, that would be fine.
Right.
I'm looking around this committee. Obviously, both you and Mr. Neal are in high demand. These are important times and days. I would also offer the same back to you. Please be advised that there will be people that on policy grounds, not on personal grounds,
Yeah.
they may offer an observation, and I would like for them to be held harmless in that
Absolutely.
attempt also, and I think you would recognize that.
I think my only point, thank you, Mr. Chairman, is look, both parties have always worked together on these issues. Emergency tax relief for disaster areas, reforming the IRS, helping families save more, finding a solid way forward, improvements in extenders. We've always worked together on these. Why stop now? You know, I think this is an area that should be bipartisan, as it has in the past. So I'm hopeful.
Well, as you know, beatings are going to continue around here, just based upon the premise that whatever you do, someone doesn't like, and likewise, the reverse of that. But my point is that it's all policy, that's not personal.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Brady, I'd also like to, if I could, before you leave, I did not have a chance to engage you anymore, and I would choose not to publicly, but I appreciate your previous meeting with me.
Yes, sir.
And would strenuously push that
Great.
issue.
Thank you, Chairman.
And I know Barbara knows that I deeply believe that too, so she'll report to you very favorably. Thank you very much. The distinguished gentleman from Pennsylvania would now please make himself available. Mr. O'Kelly. He is O to me because he's Irish, but his name is Kelly. But Mike, thank you for taking time to be with us.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mike, did you have a chance to hear the debate, the discussion, the dialogue that took place between Mr. Neal, Chairman Brady, and this committee?
The very tail end of it, not all of it.
Well, what I want to say is that I know that there are viewpoints that people have about this is just for, and it's been stated here today, this is just about Republicans trying to help rich people, millionaires, their buddies, their friends. And I want you to know that that is not true. And I have been aware of the bill. I have reviewed the bill, and I have denoted and made notations all through this report. And at nowhere do I see where it refers to any group of people. It refers to circumstances that happened to them. Circumstances, whether it be flooding, circumstances, whether it be providing, as Chairman Brady talked about, the work that your colleague, my colleague, Mrs. Jenkins, has done for taxpayer advocacy, where there is fraud, tax fraud. It comes in and actually holds harmless these whistleblowers. It properly designates in a large term areas of wildfire, areas in the islands, Hawaii, I see nothing in here that would even gain the support of a person who read the bill, and I would challenge them. I would challenge anybody that read the bill to, with any specificity, say that this is about Republican bigwigs or corporations or people, when in fact, I see no evidence of that. I see evidence of an end-of-year plan that is there to help, to fix, to remedy, to provide support to people who might not even be gainfully employed as a result of turning people in for tax frauds, tax cheats. I see where we have helped the military, members of the military, with their circumstances, many times where they are overseas and deferrals of things. I see things all through this entire report, cybersecurity, trying to do the right thing. Mr. Kelly, is there something in here that I'm missing that this is about big wigs in the GOP and Kevin Brady trying to help millionaires? Is that in here? Because I miss it. I miss it.
No, I
miss
think
it.
I think you and I have read it the same way. And I think that, again, I would hope that at some point, we look at what's good for the American people and stop trying to put them in little different spots and saying, no, it's good for this person, but not good for that person. It's good to help this person, but it's not going to help that person. This policy is solid American policy. This has nothing to do with Republicans or Democrats. It has to do with what's best for the American people. I would hope we can get beyond, now that we're a couple of weeks removed from an election, and actually start to talk about policy in the way it's designed, the way it's implemented, and who's the beneficiary of it. Listen, the business that I was in my whole life was never predicated upon who sat across me, what kind of financial status they were in. It was whether I could fill what a transportation need that they had, and doing something in their best interest that had features and benefits that added value. I would hope that we look at this legislation as being chock full of features and benefits that add value to every single American life.
Well, Mr. Kelly, I know Butler, Pennsylvania.
Yes, sir.
I've been there a couple times. I also know what kind of people live there. I've been there. I've seen them. If they were a part of something that took place in California or the Marianas Islands or Hawaii or these tragedies that have happened, do you think they're the kind of people that would not want to make sure that our tax code acknowledged their plight and the things that they've done? Do you think people from Butler, Pennsylvania would vote against where you have an employee or somebody standing up where they saw tax fraud and not providing them a balanced opportunity under federal law to be protected? Do you think the people from Butler, Pennsylvania would be so narrow that they would not recognize that members of the military and that they would be referred to as just a special deal for some group of people? Or do you think that the people from Butler, Pennsylvania would recognize they're Americans and they actually at church on Saturday or Sunday, whenever they would choose, to give thanks that they actually prayed for people and would hope that the policy would follow?
Well, I can say this because I attend Mass daily in Butler, Pennsylvania. Part of our prayers every day are for a lot of people. They don't have to live in Butler, Pennsylvania, but anybody that's undergoing any type of a situation, I think I don't care if you're from the biggest city in America or the smallest town. There's something about America that's special and different from any other place in the world, and that's that we've always recognized the plight of our fellow citizens and has always responded to the best of our abilities. And oftentimes our hearts are very willing and sometimes our wallets are weak. But I've never seen anybody that opted out entirely and just said, there's just nothing I can do. Yeah. So I think we embrace the same values. I've never thought that to be a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. I've always just thought that was the greatness of America, and I think what's encompassed in this is trying to serve those that really need us at the most times. And when we talk about the disaster relief, that's not just happening in one place, and we know that. So it happens in the poorest regions, it happens in the most prosperous regions, but when it happens, and I think we always show up. We always show up when we're most needed.
Well, I think people in Dallas, Texas are very fortunate about a lot of things. And sometimes we say, glad it wasn't us. But I don't think we've ever said, I'm glad it happened to them, or we're not going to be benevolent. Yeah. And I really have a problem with anybody that read the bill thinking it's about millionaires or GOP buddies. Because if it were, some of the people wouldn't be in here.
Well, I can tell you, sir, I have been involved in the debate and never came up about looking at anybody's financial status before we do what's in the best interest of the American people.
Yes, sir. Mr. Kelly, thank you very much. If you'll please make sure that your family knows that your service, as well as the people that also suffered from your great state, know that we do believe in them.
No, thank you, sir.
Distinguished gentleman from Georgia. The gentleman does not seek time. Mr. McGovern?
Thank you. And I don't, we have our leadership elections going on as well, so I'm not going to pursue any questions. I just want to make a comment. I'm really impressed, Mr. Chairman, that you must have gone to the Evelyn Wood Speed Reading School, because to go through this bill, which we just saw for the first time on Tuesday night, is pretty impressive. And Mr. Kelly, I agree, these are issues we should be talking about, but that's why it's unfortunate that this bill, like so many other bills, didn't have a hearing, it didn't go through a markup. I mean, that's what committees are supposed to do. So I appreciate you being here, but again, I think maybe I'm old school. I think committees ought to do their work, and again, the first time we saw this was Tuesday night. So, but thank you for being here, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. As a matter of fact, I went to a school called Southwestern University. Speed reading was perhaps encouraged, but thoughtful process of reading with comprehension was more important than speed reading. But in fact, I prefer to read and understand and get what is under there. So I'll accept the speed reading compliment, but it was really the content. Distinguished gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess.
Chairman, I apologize for being late. I have no questions.
All right, would you like for me to defer and go to to the distinguished gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Byrne, and come back to you? Gentleman does not seek time. Thank you very much. Ms. Torres?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad that you're able to speed read and comprehend at a much faster pace than the rest of, well, I can't speak for my colleagues, but certainly for me. 298 pages after we were told earlier in the week that we were not going to have a Rules Committee meeting, I think is very disingenuous and very disrespectful to the members that are supposed to be voting on this giant bill called Tax Extender. So forgive me if I have not read the 298 pages written in this document here. I would like to ask, since these are tax extenders that we're talking about here, how much is going to GM, who's laying off 16,000 workers? Can anybody answer that?
I don't know that General Motors is.
You don't know, sir, so you don't know the bill you're
excuse me.
presenting?
Allow him
You
to
asked me-
answer.
You asked me a question about what specifically would go to General Motors.
I'm asking
Yeah,
you,
yes,
since
and I'm
I
saying-
have not been able to read this
Yes,
bill
yes,
because
well-
it was only presented on Tuesday
and I-
night,
and-
and these are extenders.
Yeah.
These are tax extenders, so how much is going to General Motors, who is laying off 16,000 people?
Yeah, well,
How much?
well, I can tell you this right now. That's a proposal that General Motors has made. There's not been one of those workers laid off yet.
My statement, sir, and my question to you is not about the General Motors
misunderstood you. I
deal.
thought you were
I'm
referring to General
asking you,
Motors.
what is in this bill that you have not given the minority an opportunity to read, that you're sitting here presenting? Do you know the answer or not?
No, I have absolutely no idea what you're asking me.
So you're asking your members to vote on a bill that nobody has read, sir.
Okay, excuse me just a moment, please. The bill was posted on Monday night at 7 o'clock, 7:40. And I would ask the distinguished gentleman from Pennsylvania to take a moment with his tax counsel and to answer what I believe is a question, and that is that something that has not happened yet,
Yeah.
that we are aware of that might happen as it relates to General Motors, are there any provisions in the bill that relate to General Motors?
No.
And I would ask the gentleman to please give a yes or a no answer so that the gentlewoman who would get a direct answer.
No.
And I would ask the gentleman, is there anything in this tax extenders package that would relate to GM and the plight either that they're in or other than where their employees might, as any employee in the country, might be a part of this bill, anything specific to GM?
No, there's no special provision in here for General Motors.
Thank you very much. The distinguished gentleman has asked a very direct question. The gentlewoman is entitled to a direct answer, and the distinguished gentleman from Butler, Pennsylvania, the Ways and Means Committee has said there is nothing in this extenders bill, and that comes as a result of him getting a direct answer from counsel who sits behind him.
There is a section that deals with repatriated cash. I have no idea because I have not had an opportunity to read this last-minute bill to see if any of the benefits that they have drawn from in the past are being extended. That is why I'm asking this question. I appreciate your no answer, but I have no way to verify that because I have not been given proper time to read this bill. On the issue of throwing crumbs to California fire victims, I find that extremely offensive because Californians will be punished when they file their taxes because of the last tax scam bill that was passed by the GOP alone. As a result, when you say that we ought to be doing what our constituents want, California has spoken very loudly. And as a result, 7 of your members lost their seat because they were punishing their constituents. So I'm asking you to give us a little bit of more time to read this bill, not just the minority, but also your own members, so that in 2 years from now, we don't have to revisit what happened to you in this last election. And I yield back.
Thank you very much.
Well,
I believe the gentleman was asked a question and answered it properly. Does the gentleman wish to extend his remarks as it relates to this dialogue?
No. I think when the question from General Motors comes up, there's nothing specifically in there for General Motors. I think in the outlines of what happened with disaster-related tax relief, it does very clearly say that it covers the California fires, in addition to other areas that were affected by these disasters.
Well, all across the United
Yes,
States
yes,
and
yes.
our territories.
Right. So I would say that is addressed. I can't address the gentle lady's.
Well, this is a tax extenders, not necessarily, quote, tax policy of changing things. This is a different matter. Thank you very much. Distinguished gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, sir. Just some observations. I was in Huntsville, Alabama yesterday and the day before, and I was not far from where they're just now clearing ground to get ready to build a huge facility that both Mazda and Toyota will be making several classes of their cars. And I thought that was an irony that I was there when that was happening, when General Motors, an American company, is actually closing down some of its lines of cars in another part of the country. And I think that those two things are not related because of taxes. I think that they're only related because of the business models of American car companies, which seem to be shifting over to trucks and that sort of thing, and the foreign car companies that seem to be have more attractive passenger vehicles. I grew up in a car family, so I know a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can reconcile it two. I was going to tell you a couple of anecdotes about my district. I come from L.A., Lower Alabama, which is as unlike the real L.A. as you can imagine. We don't have too many millionaires in Lower Alabama, but we don't have too many wealthy people. But let me tell you about a few of the people that I have interacted with since we passed our tax bill. I've had a number of individuals in my district come up and thank me because of the tax bill, because they got bonuses at work. In fact, I've been at 2 different businesses while the employer was handing out the bonus checks and said, this is because of the tax bill. I had a woman come up to me in the Walmart one day, and she said, I've been trying to get my son hired to the place where I work. I've worked there for a number of years. It's not a particularly big business, but didn't have any spots for him. And then our employer got up one day and said, because of the tax bill, we're expanding our business. So I went to the owner and said, will you hire my son now? He said, well, bring him in. We got to interview him and all that. But she said, my son got hired, and he's got a better job with a lot better benefits. I just want to thank you, because that tax bill ended up hiring my son. And then my favorite one was during Small Business Week, I was going around my district looking at small businesses, which was great. And I was in a rural part of my district, and I was in I guess it was a power equipment store. And the man that owns it was great. He knew everything there was to know about power equipment, had his overalls on and everything, and really taught me a lot about power equipment I thought I knew I didn't know. We were standing there by the counter, where you check out and pay for whatever you're buying, and there was a lady behind the counter, and he was in front of the counter. I looked at him and said, tell me how the tax bill is affecting you. He says, tax bill's not helping me at all. The lady behind the counter is shaking her head no the whole time he's saying that. He turned to look at me and said, why are you shaking your head no? She says, that tax bill's saving you a lot of money, so you can take some of that money and give it bonuses to the people that figured out how much it's saving you. The truth of the matter is that this tax bill has benefited just about everybody in America, except for people that don't pay taxes. If you don't pay taxes, it doesn't benefit you. But that's not who it was aimed at. It was aimed at the hardworking people of America who pay the taxes that run the country. And we act like those people don't exist here in Washington. And it really bothers me that we somehow try to lump them in with rich people. And that's just not the people I represent. And they were tremendously benefited. The average family of 4 in my district is going to get an extra $2,000 in their pocket this year. Now, I know in San Francisco, in the real L.A., that's not real money. But in my L.A., that's a lot of money. And those people are going to have a really nice Christmas as a result of that. So I'm very proud to have voted for this tax bill. My staff and I have been going through this bill, looking at it. I don't understand every little thing in it right at the moment, but I understand the high points. There's a lot of good stuff in here. And I'm just glad that our Ways and Means Committee didn't stop last year. That you've continued to look at other things we can do to make the tax code better. I think we should all be about that. And I don't want to talk about the elections a few weeks ago, because I can talk about some elections before that, and I can make some prognostications about some elections coming up. But I don't think this is about elections. This is about us doing our job, which is taking care of the average working man and woman in America. And this tax bill that we passed last year and the bill before it, from what I know about it so far, helps those folks. That's who I represent. And if it helps the millionaires too, that's okay with me, because I'm not about hurting millionaires. But I really don't think they need our help. I think it's those people I just identified for you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. We don't seem to have any other member that's here. Dr. Burgess, would you seek time again, or gentleman satisfied?
Mr. Chairman, I can't say anything better than what Mr. Byrne has just elaborated. You heard my story about American Airlines employees that I related to this committee that, in a similar vein, prior to the time that we left at the beginning of October. there's not really much that has changed. I think it has made a positive impact in the district. And the thing that has been most important to me, and I'm anxious to hear from people after they go through a tax filing season, the simplification that we've brought to a significant number of American taxpayers. No longer will they have to keep up with a shoebox full of receipts. I know in my household, we're looking forward to that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the time.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. O'Kelly, thank you for taking time to be with us today. I'm not presuming that you did or did not bring anything in writing, but if you did, our awesome stenographer would appreciate the opportunity to have that as part of the record.
I think everything we have is already here, sir.
I want to thank you for taking time, Mike.
Thank you.
I know there's a lot going on, but I think that your presentation was worthy of what your beliefs are, and I want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, sir. Okay, we'll now call up our second panel. We've got a panel of two other distinguished young men from, one from the Ways and Means Committee and one who's also a very dear friend of mine from Judiciary Committee, the gentleman, Mr. King, and the gentleman, Mr. Reed. And if there's any other member that would seek time of the committee today, we're certainly, operators are standing by and we're ready to take your calls. So, Mr. Reed, do you seek time before the committee? If you'll join Mr. King up here, we'll try and make sure that the opportunity to allow members to give their feedback is important. I would say to both of you, as I said to the distinguished gentlemen who were here originally, anything you brought in writing, we'd appreciate getting a copy for us from stenographer, and without objection, we will enter that into the record. Distinguished gentleman from Iowa is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee here today and make a couple of offers and proposals that I think take this excellent bill into a better category yet. And I'd say first that H.R. 1 was the best vote I've put up in the time I've been in Congress, and that covers some territory. I would like to add to what Mr. Burns said is that there were some people that didn't pay taxes that are the beneficiaries of that, and they're the people that got a raise because of the competition for labor because they knew the economy is increasing. And not that I could improve upon that speech, Mr. Chairman, but I just wanted to make that point. It was excellent, all of the things delivered. What I have, first, I'd like to take up one of two amendments that I offer. The first one, if I could do King IA 269, and it addresses this. I'm going to call it here a bill that I had drafted, introduced. I'm going to call it the Kitty Rayburg bill, even though we don't have that necessarily that name on that, because she's the one that brought it to my attention. And I served with her in the Iowa Senate back a number of years ago, and I know their operation. It's the typical quintessential family farm. A small operation, most of everything or perhaps everything paid for. A tight operation that they're not expanding, they're not shrinking, they're taking care of their own, and they're a C Corp. And they had been operating up until H.R. 1 passed and was enacted. They were operating with a 15% tax rate because there was a $50,000 cap built into the old law that was eliminated with H.R. 1. And so they're in the category with, I suppose, thousands of other Americans that are going to have adjusted gross income of less than $50,000 that saw their taxes actually go up because of H.R. 1. So if you think of it at the $50,000 level, then it's a 6% increase from 15%, which is what their rate was, up to the 21%, which we leveled for all the C Corps. And that would be a maximum tax increase for them of $3,000 a year. It's kind of a bitter pill to swallow when you're a small operation doing things right and you're watching a big tax cut bill come along. And so this is just, I believe that the staff and Ways and Means wrote this way just for conformity purposes. I don't think there was any other policy reason involved, and we can't seem to find one either. So I would just encourage this. This language does this. It restores the language that existed before H.R. 1 was signed into law that would allow for those with an adjusted gross income up to $50,000 that are C Corps to go back to the original 15% tax bracket. And it's just, I think it's a humane thing to do to the smaller operations. I know the one that I illustrated, former state senator Kitty Rayburg, I know that operation. I know that represents thousands of Americans in the same category, although they weren't a big statistic. And I don't have a score for this, but it can't be a lot in proportion to what we're working with here, Mr. Chairman. So that would conclude my opening statement on it. I have another amendment, but if you'd like me to proceed to that or take questions, I'm happy to do either.
I would proceed to whatever you would wish to discuss with the committee, and then they will have that opportunity to go through those with you. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second piece is King IA 268 will be the amendment. And it's legislation that I've drafted and introduced to this Congress a number of years ago and in every Congress since. And it's called the New IDEA Act. And what it does is it clarifies that under this legislation, it clarifies that wages and benefits that are paid to illegals are not tax deductible. It gives the employer safe harbor if he uses E-Verify, and therefore we have a way to enforce this thing through the tax code. It has a 6-year statute of limitations built into it, so it's got a cumulative incentive for the employer to clean up his workforce, but it doesn't jerk the rug out from underneath anybody. It lets them make their adjustments accordingly. The net effect of it is that, in round numbers figuring, is that if you had a $10 an hour illegal and the IRS comes in and does an audit, and they would run the data of the employees that are listed in the tax code through E-Verify, and if they can't be verified through E-Verify, then the IRS then can rule that it's an illegal hire, and in that case, there would be interest and penalty and taxes that applied to those wages, because once it's denied as a business expense, then that goes back into your gross receipts, shows up as net income and taxable. So it would take your $10 an hour illegal to right at $16 an hour by the time you add up the tax liability and the interest and the penalty. And so it's a 60% increase in the cost of illegal labor, and that would be a strong enough incentive that many employers would opt to clean up their workforce. The bottom line on this becomes this, that the closest thing I can get to a legitimate score for this bill was produced by Center for Immigration Studies, not CBO, but Center for Immigration Studies, and they produced a score here within the last year of $25.4 billion a year, that's with a B, or for the purpose of this bill, 10 years, $254 billion in revenue that it would generate. So we're looking at a lot of red ink, increasing red ink, looking for ways we pay for things. This restores the rule of law, and it puts the IRS into the position of enforcement. You don't have to wonder if the next administration or this administration is going to enforce the law. We've got the IRS that would be out there doing that, generating the revenue. And into this bill, we also add a requirement that the IRS builds a working team with the Social Security Administration and the Department of Homeland Security, so the hands of the federal government are working together on the same cause, and that's to enforce existing laws. Scoring up at $254 billion, I don't know how the Ways and Means Committee could turn down such an offer, and I wanted to make sure that the Rules Committee had an opportunity to consider these proposals. I have other good ideas, but in the interest of time, I limit them to 2 today, Mr. Chairman, and I would conclude my opening remarks.
Mr. King, thank you very much. Mr. Reed? Welcome, Rules Committee. Your regular attendance here is appreciated, as is Mr. King's, and distinguished gentleman's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, and to our former colleagues, David Dreyer and Louise Slaughter, who I remember serving with on this committee, and she is watching me over my shoulder, as always, so it's great to be back here in the chamber with you on the Rules Committee. And, Mr. Chairman, I'm here today to offer an amendment on behalf of Mr. Paulson of Minnesota. Chairman Brady has mentioned many times provisions in the tax package have bipartisan support in the House and Senate and stand a good chance at passing before the end of the year if we can find that bipartisan level of support. And as Mr. Paulson and I agree, repealing the medical device tax certainly fits into that category, and in fact could increase the support for the final bill passed on Republican and Democratic support in the past, as demonstrated by vote counts here in the House. While the preference is a permanent repeal, this amendment gives an additional 1-year delay of the tax until 2021, but the medical device innovators need certainty, predictability. Again, a permanent repeal is ideal, but this 1-year delay is a good compromise to help startups, which is where the next generation of innovation will come from. The medical device industry is truly an American success story. directly employing more than 400,000 people. In Minnesota, more than 35,000 people are employed at almost 700 companies, mostly small companies that you've never heard of. In New York, there are more than 5,000 people working in the medical device industry, and it is expected to grow more quickly than the healthcare sector in the state. When it was in effect, the device tax caused the loss of over 29,000 jobs. Back in July, the House voted to permanently repeal this burdensome tax with historic levels of support from Democrats and Republicans. 283 members voted to pass that bill, including 57 Democrats. Recognize this bad policy that is hurting innovation needs to be repealed. 80% of medical device companies are small businesses with less than 50 employees, and 93% have less than 500 employees, and these are good, high-paying jobs. And America is a net exporter of medical devices. But in 2013, the healthcare law imposed a 2.3% excise tax on all medical devices. 2.3% may not sound like much, but it's a tax but it's not a tax on profits. It is a tax on sales, on revenues. Investors hold back investment capital in new companies when there is a threat of an excise tax starting back up. That's because it already takes 8 to 10 years for these companies to become profitable in the first place. This tax raises the bar and makes it even more difficult to become profitable. It means less research, development, fewer engineers and technicians deployed in this industry. Most importantly, it means less innovation for new life-saving and life-supporting technologies for patients and our fellow Americans. This is about making sure that patients have access to these products because their lives depend on it. I urge this committee to support this amendment, and I'm proud to offer it on behalf of Mr. Paulson as he had a previously scheduled conflicts, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Reed, thank you very much. Mr. King, I'm not really as aware of as I should be this section, what might be Amendment 268, but I'm going to look at that in detail. Has the gentleman approached Ways and Means evidently repeatedly over the years about this issue?
I've had some conversations about it, but I can't say that there's been, I wasn't able to find anyone in Ways and Means to offer the amendment. And so that's why this is the second time I brought it before the committee here.
I'm delighted that you're here. Mr. Reed, I assume that when you talk about the medical device tax, you're talking about what was included in the Affordable Care Act.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
And I don't assume to correct, because that's not what I'm trying to do here, but I had thought that it was a tax on the manufacturer, not the sale.
No, it is a tax on the sale and the revenue from the...
Not the manufacturing of the device.
Well, the manufacturer of the device as well as...
So it's not the sale, it's the manufacturer.
Well, the manufacturer, but it's based on the actual revenue that comes from the sale.
Well, it's my understanding that it was based upon the manufacturer, not the sale, which was the destructive part of what the President Obama and Mrs. Pelosi et al. Did. It was to make sure they did not manufacture the product.
That's a fair...
Had nothing to do with the sale. So have you ever been in sales?
I can't say that I have been.
Well, I have been. And the destructive part of this is that it means that if you are a salesperson, every product that you've got, whether you sell it or not, was taxed.
That's true.
That's how you wipe out business, where you can't even manufacture a product to be able to go and offer it for sale because you had to pay tax on it.
That's
and
correct.
it's anti, not only competitive, it is anti-free enterprise. And it is just one of the areas that I have so strenuously, I think, been willing to catch grief about my 50 votes. I think the votes that I've made about saying the individual piece parts of Obamacare, comrade, were done for a reason. It wasn't health care. It was to kill the free enterprise system. And if I cannot even manufacture that without paying a tax on it, forget the sale. That's success. I can't even have any salesmen because I can't afford them because I had to pay an enormous tax off what I made. So think that what we have done these years is the right thing. Are you telling me that we are not extending that for another year?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. What we're trying to do is to, obviously, ideally have a permanent repeal of the medical device tax.
But we've been
1 year
doing
delay.
them year to year.
Correct. And what we're looking for is another level of certainty to extend this out so that the industry can at least have some certainty for a period of
But
initial
for the
12 months.
tax year 2018, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
Is there a provision that protects it for the year?
Correct. And what we're doing is
So
extending
you're
it to
trying extend
2021.
it. Well, I get that.
Yeah.
And I think I knew that when you were talking. My mind wandered to really the actual destructive nature of what was done.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right, Mr. Chairman. And what I would offer is, when I was saying it was a tax on the sale, it's not a tax on the profits to the manufacturer.
Right.
It's a tax on that actual production of that device.
Manufacturing.
Yeah,
They were
correct.
pretty smart. They didn't even want it built. Not in America. They didn't even want it built in America. I think we've done a great job. Mr. Paulson, your colleague that you spoke of, I'd like to say that I sit in Dallas, Texas, in the manufacturing hub of a lot of these parts and medical devices, but he really does sit in the epicenter of this. And gentleman Fred Upton, Michigan, sits in another very important area, and it's jobs. It's actual jobs. It's manufacturing jobs. It's high-tech jobs. It's the future. It's things that provide doctors the ability actually to get you up on your feet again. It's the ability that they have to handle the surgery that might take place to save a life. It's the opportunity perhaps to bring sight back to people. It's an opportunity for those that have cancer to receive the benefit of technology. And the law is to tax it at its manufacturing to where it never gets manufactured. That's how destructive this Affordable Care Act is in another way. Dr. Burgess?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Reed, just so I have it clear in my mind, we have delayed the device tax on several occasions in the past. And currently, when is the expiration of that delay?
My understanding is the end of 2020. So we're looking for a one-year extension now to bring additional certainty to the industry over that time horizon.
And that's because right after the first of the year, those companies are going to be sitting down and making their budget proposals and going to their lenders and talking to their employees.
Exactly correct, Dr. Burgess. And what they're looking at is you're talking about a industry that is capital intensive, a lot of tremendous amount of research and development, a lot of costs that are associated with these devices and putting them into commercialization and things like that. And so anytime we can extend the time horizon, permanent, like we had articulated, permanency would be ideal. But we recognize that may be a bridge too far at the present ask. And so what we're looking for is a one-year, Mr. Paulson and myself are looking for a one-year delay to open that time horizon even further.
And the products that are subject to this tax are any Class 2 or higher FDA Class 2 medical device?
I believe that's accurate.
So Class 1 devices, Band-Aids, Kleenex, they're not taxed. Class 2 devices, hypodermic needles, perhaps dental appliances, these are taxed.
That's my understanding. These more, how should you say, like orthopedic implants, things of that nature, diabetes type of equipment, that type of stuff, those are medical devices that would be subject to the tax.
And of course, what was really what I believe the people who wrote this legislation were trying to achieve was a way at getting at the manufacturers of these very expensive imaging devices. Imaging is expensive and it adds to the overall healthcare spend. They didn't want to tax an actual X-ray or tax a proton beam accelerator or something that might be used treat a malignant disease. So let's just tax the dickens out of the machine, and you're, what is it, 2.3%
2.3%.
of the sale of that external proton beam, and those machines may cost well into the millions of dollars. So it is a substantial tax that the manufacturer is paying for that.
I couldn't have said it any better, Dr. Burgess, and I think that is why the tax is so devastating to innovation, jobs, and to the job point, it's not just in Minnesota, where Mr. Paulson resides, not just in New York, it's across the entire country. This is an exciting opportunity for advanced manufacturing. This is one of the innovations that we're leading in the world, and to have this type of tax policy is something that is adverse to that innovative type of expansion that we're seeing in this industry. And that's why it needs to be repealed permanently, but at least a one-year continuation of a delay so that we can give further certainty to the marketplace.
But again, just to be clear, yes, it is the big imaging devices that are subject to this tax, but it's also on a much more personal level, your dental implants are taxed. Your heart valve, just the device itself is taxed. The catheters that are used in a cardiac catheterization to decide if you need a stent is taxed, and then the stent itself is taxed. It is an insidious and well hidden from people that it actually affects. So I know I have heard from a number of manufacturers about the concept of we need the stability, we need to be able to plan, we need to be able to develop our workforce. We can't do this with the uncertainty of this tax that is threatening literally threatening our productivity. So I'm with you. I would like to see a permanent repeal of this. I do realize the difficulty with the cost, but it should never have been done in the first place. And my opinion, it only hurts the people that folks thought they were helping when they passed the Affordable Care Act. It hurts the heart patient, the dental patient, the patient who needs imaging, the patient that needs cancer therapy. So thank you for bringing this to the Rules Committee. I appreciate your discussion with this today.
Thank you for the input.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts.
Let me thank both gentlemen for being here, and Mr. King, I got a personal favor to ask. I know you and I differ on the immigration issue very dramatically, but I would prefer when you come here that you don't refer to undocumented immigrants as illegals or the illegal. I find that phrase dehumanizing and offensive, but I just, I wish you would recognize that these are human beings too. And anyway, I just say that because you kept on referring to people as the illegal, and it bugged me. So I just wanted to say that for the record, and I have no questions. I yield back.
Thank you very much. You know, Mr. Byrne, I think they named a tank after you. They did. The Bradley. Yes, sir. Gentleman's recognized, does not seek time. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, your visit up here each time is an inflection point to remind us of not only our duty, but also to highlight the things which are very apparent to people who go back home, the people who pay attention and listen to our workers, our developers, our scientists, our people who are concerned about our future. Likewise, they are concerned about the jobs that we have in this country. So, Mr. King, would you choose to make a comment?
I would just like to make a final statement here in that it occurs to me as I listen to Mr. Reed's presentation of Mr. Paulson's amendment that if there's a concern about paying for that, King Amendment 268 handles that easily with change left over. So I think we brought a real good presentation here to the Rules Committee together. And I would yield back. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Reed, I did not have an opportunity earlier. Mr. Neal and Mr. Brady, Chairman Brady, had to step out. But you seem like you're a well-versed young man who has sat in the Ways and Means Committee for a number of years. Did more revenue come in this year than the previous year?
Actually, yeah, absolutely.
Do you mind talking for a minute
Sure.
about revenue that is coming in to the Treasury?
I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, because this is some of the misinformation that I see with constituents as I do town halls back in the district and have a conversation about the tax reform, the tax cut package that we passed, and a lot of folks were under the impression that the significant deficits that we're seeing coming out of Washington, D.C. today somehow had to do with reduced revenues going to the U.S. Treasury, and that's just not the facts. The facts is revenues are up about 2%. Overall this year in 2018. Obviously, that has to do with what I think you and I share, is that a belief that if you can grow the economy, if you can get people back to work, you're going to have a huge amount of revenue positive impact on the U.S. Treasury. And it also highlights the fact that when you look at revenue going up 2% in 2018 from where we were previously, you have to ask the question, then where's the deficit coming from? And you see spending expenditures going up 7%. And when you see that type of highlight in the math, I think it speaks volumes to many of us, and I hope every American citizen across the country, that really what is causing the deficit crisis and the debt crisis here in Washington, D.C. is on the spending side of the ledger. We are growing the economy. When you have 3.5% to 4% growth like we're seeing, that is a part of the solution to the debt crisis. And when we can couple that with reasonable spending reforms, I think we're in a position to take on this debt crisis going forward.
Okay, well, let's suppose you provided us a good opportunity to delve into this. What kind of spending is that? Because Republicans had held spending flat at 2009 levels starting in 12. So 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Is it entitlement spending, or is it government spending that Congress goes and spends?
It's a great point, and I often share with constituents in town hall meetings. If you look at, typically we're paying on average a $3.8 trillion each year out of the U.S. budget. And so the question then is where is that money going, and where are we doing, especially given the track record of what we've done on discretionary spending. Discretionary spending is that stuff that, as you know, Mr. Chairman, very well, that we look at each and every year. It goes through the appropriations process. We're looking at a funding deadline here on December 7th that we're going to have to deal with to keep the government open. That is only 1/3 of that $3.8 trillion that we spend. 2/3 of that $3.8 trillion goes to mandatory spending out of the federal coffers. It goes to things like entitlements, which we are familiar with, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And also now we have a growing potential crisis on the horizon that I'm very concerned about as interest rates come back to some type of normalization process, as you see the Federal Reserve even today offering some comments on raising interest rates. As interest rates go up, the interest on that debt goes up exorbitantly. So when you're looking at this crisis, you really have to have the honest conversation, I think, with members as well as American citizens that look at what we need to do is look at the whole $3.8 trillion, all of the areas of spending, and that's why getting entitlements, Social Security, Medicare in a position of solvency and reform so that they're addressing that spending issue, but also put Medicaid, mandatory government, and hopefully get the debt under control so these interest costs are going to be manageable for the foreseeable future.
Well, about the last 8 or 9 months, I've had an opportunity to sit on this, what might be bipartisan, bicameral committee, subcommittee, so to speak. It was a committee, but there were subcommittees associated with that where we would work on trying to look at reforming budgetary processes and what would be in and what would be out, and what would be reportable, and what would be told. And it was amazing as we went through these, there was not a lot of opportunity on the Democratic side to want to say very forthrightly, here's the problem. There was a tendency, I think, for us to want to not highlight, not put before both bodies, although I think we'll end up in some circumstance where there will be a reportable way to do this, but really to highlight the tragic nature of where we are putting our future. So thank you to both of you for taking time to be here today. I think that what happened here today, Chairman Brady and the committee made sure that we talked about things that were good to help people who have found themselves during the year in trouble. We have found a way to help and take good ideas from people who might see tax fraud. We've had an opportunity today to help our veterans and people who serve in the military, and I think it was all done in about 300 pages. And I think that it should be commended, and the things that weren't in here, wish some had been more, but I think this is directly related to helping people, as you have suggested, to have a long-term view of jobs and opportunity in this country. So I want to thank both of you very much. By the way, we have an awesome stenographer, so if you brought anything in writing, allowing her that opportunity to have that and complete the record accordingly would be appreciated. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, we've had a chance to handle this extenders bill. I would make sure that we do understand that we will have to come back to complete our work on this. Does the distinguished gentleman from Alabama, Lower Alabama, have anything further that he would like to discuss with the committee? Thank you very much. We will now find ourselves, because of the meetings that are occurring, leadership meetings around the Capitol, we will now find ourselves subject to call the chair. Well, here we go, huh? Rules Committee to come to order, and thank you very much for joining us again this evening. The opportunity for us to discuss the tax expenditures bill, which we previously have taken not only testimony this afternoon, but also had an opportunity to have a strenuous discussion up here, which I think was very good for all of us. So we now are going to be ready for the motion, and I would yield to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule providing for the consideration of Senate Amendment H.R. 88, Shiloh National Park Boundary Adjustment Parks Crossroads Battlefield Designation Act. This rule makes in order a motion offered by the Chair of the Committee on Ways and Means or his designee that the House concur to the Senate Amendment in H.R. 88 with an amendment consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-85, modified by the amendment printed in the Rules Committee report. The rule waives all points of order against the consideration of the motion. The rule provides that the Senate amendment and the motion shall be considered as read. Finally, the rule provides for 1 hour debate on the motion equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means.
Thank you very much. You now heard the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, the Senate amendment to H.R. 88, the tax extenders bill. A motion to concur the rule with an amendment being modified by what was called Brady number 18, 1 hour debate to Ways and Means. Is there amendment or discussion?
No.
Thank you very much. So we will now move to the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask for a roll call on that?
The gentleman asks for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole, Mr. Woodall, Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Collins. Aye. Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne, Mr. Newhouse. Aye. Mr. Newhouse, aye. Mr. Buck? Yep. Mr. Buck, yep. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney, aye. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis? Mrs. Torres? Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
6 yeas, 1 nay.
The motion is agreed to, and accordingly, this will be something that I will handle on the floor.
And I think I'm going to handle it for us, because no one else is here.
Kind of rolls downhill, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of rolls downhill real fast. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to move that forward. We know that today is Wednesday, tomorrow's Thursday, so we will see you on the floor tomorrow. Is there any other business for the committee?
Do you have
Mr. Buck?
any idea what time this may be tomorrow?
Well, I would envision it'd be around noontime. Oh, whoops, that's 4 o'clock. Oh, okay, that's right.
Around 4 o'clock?
Their
Okay,
meetings.
terrific. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to, if I could, have the gentleman from Colorado, if he could take his seat and explain to us, he has some visitors this evening in the committee, and so I would yield to well, he can make an announcement, because I'm sure they're going to be here, and distinguished gentleman from Freedom, Colorado, has some visitors that are expected in here at any minute. The distinguished gentleman is recognized.
And they are dying to meet the chairman of the Rules Committee, but they are being delayed on the way with all the great sites of the Capitol. So
Great, so you've got a group from ALEC?
from ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council.
Yes.
And here's, yeah, come on in. We're gonna introduce them one by one.
So we've got an opportunity here at the Rules Committee to welcome distinguished visitors, not only to the United States Capitol, but distinguished visitors who will have an opportunity to watch as the Rules Committee finalizes its work on H.R. 88, which is a tax suspenders bill, and the distinguished visitors that we have here, I assume, and Mr. Buck, do you happen to have a list of those people or an idea of where they're from?
I do not, but each of them knows their own name if you'd like them to.
Well, we're not
identify
going to
themselves.
probably do that, but what I would say is if you would give them the welcome that you always do on behalf of the Rules Committee, and then I'll follow that up, or we'll go to Mr. McGovern next, and then I will finalize that. Gentleman's
And I
recognized.
appreciate Mr. McGovern staying here at this late hour, so thank you for doing this. I think we have a couple more to come in here. So, Mr. Massey, you can stay if you want. I know that you are, oh, okay. I know that you're very successful in this. Yes. Getting. So welcome to all these wonderful folks from ALEC, many of them from Colorado. Welcome to the Rules Committee. The chairman and ranking member, Congressman Sessions and Congressman McGovern, are seated in front of you and will address you. I just wanted to say thank you for coming on the tour with us. This is a really interesting committee. I've served on this committee for 2 years, and almost everything that doesn't happen by suspension in the House goes through the Rules Committee. Amendments are considered here, and a rule is either open, closed, or modified, and the committee has great debates. And the great thing about this committee, from my perspective, is everything we vote on the floor, we learn about here first. And not my first 2 years here, I didn't know in depth what I was necessarily voting on. Here, we really get a good feel for everything that hits the floor. And I really appreciate the chairman giving me this opportunity. Seated to my left is Congresswoman Cheney, and I started in Congress in 1986 working for her father, who was the congressman from Wyoming, and now Liz Cheney represents Wyoming. And seated to my right is Mr. Dan Newhouse from the state of Washington, who is a star and a fellow classmate here. And so I think the others have left, but I would yield back to the chairman and appreciate the opportunity to have addressed this group.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this gentleman. Does gentleman from Massachusetts wish time?
Well, welcome to the Rules Committee, and I'm sure you had a great tour that Mr. Buck and Mr. Massey led for you. I would have led a different tour than they did, but and I would have told you different things. But But in any event, it's great. This committee is a unique committee. It's a special committee, as Mr. Buck said. I mean, basically, this is the traffic cop of Congress. I mean, everything that matters comes to this committee before it goes to the floor. But I want to welcome you to Washington, and I hope you had I mean, this is great. I mean, are you at the beginning of your tour or the end of your tour? In the middle? Okay, yeah, so, yeah. Yeah. Actually, there were places, I did, one night, I had a group come in from Massachusetts, and we did a tour, and it was late at night, and one of my aides had gone on a tour of the Capitol to point out all the places that were haunted, and so we gave a tour of all the places that are haunted. And there's not here, not yet. But anyway, welcome, and I hope you have a great stay. You're back.
Jim, how long have you been on the committee, if you would mind
So
covering?
I got elected, I've been on the committee since 2001. So my former boss, who's up there in the portrait, Joe Moakley, was the chairman of the Rules Committee. And he became ill, and I was already in Congress. And in Massachusetts, we have a tradition of having somebody on this committee. So before Joe Moakley, Tip O'Neill, who was the speaker, but before he was speaker, he was on the Rules Committee. And Moakley thought it was important to keep a Massachusetts person on the Rules Committee. And so when he was sick, he basically ordered me to come on this committee, which is a great committee. And we meet more than any other committee in the Congress. We fight more than any other committee in the Congress, but we actually like each other. Again, a lot of important things get solved in this committee. So I think this is probably the most important committee in the Congress. And the chairman here have been gracious and kind to us, those of us in the minority, and we all appreciate that. And so it's great that you're able to be here for him to welcome you. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Also, what could hear if we spend a lot of time is, and our wives like each other.
Yeah.
We think it's important that we come up and do the things that we do up here, whether we like them or not. We recognize some of those frailties in the responsibilities that we have. But Jim's wife is deeply involved in the cancer issue, as well as my wife. And our wives, spouses, because not everybody's got a wife. Some women serve and their spouses participate. But we try and lend to public service. And I think what you're here about is part of your public service, too. I would probably guess that most of you are elected officials in one way or another back home, and that you have the awesome, not only responsibility, but duty to venture into areas of not just new thought, but really venture into ideas about governance and creative ways to look at not just problems, but public policy. And that is what we do here. We have, I'm in my 20th year here on the committee, my 6th year as chairman. But we do vigorously defend that which we believe. And we try and sell it and plan it and do those things. Mrs. Cheney, who is over here, number 9 on the committee as a new person, will be the lead communicator for the Republican House this next term. She is a young thinker. She is comes from a political family. I come from a political family.
My family owns a liquor store.
It's okay. I'll drink to that. And so we merged together, as Congressman McGovern said. We spend a lot of time up here. I have been here, and Jim has been here every hour around a clock. Not every week, not every year, but we have been here at every hour of the morning, afternoon, evening, and at night, attempting to bring things to the floor many of which are very difficult, many of which are controversial, many of which have hopes and expectations of performance by either party. And the parties live and die off the ideas and the substance of the performance of this committee. The substance of this committee is noted. It is, if you were to use Wikipedia and say, what is the most powerful committee in the House or Senate, it will say the Rules Committee. And the reason why the Rules Committee is because in the Senate, they really don't have a Rules Committee that operates like we do. They have cloture. This is cloture to the House. And so the committee handles jurisdiction. Others do only within their jurisdictional realm. We handle all 20 or 21 committees' jurisdiction before it goes to the floor. The power actually exists within a germaneness doctrine or viewpoints of germaneness because when a bill is filed, a bill will go what's called into the hopper and go to the committee of jurisdiction, but many times there will be a second, third, secondary referral. Many of the same issues are handled differently by the bankers or financial services people than CPAs. They're handled differently in judiciary by lawyers. They're handled differently by people who are business people in energy and commerce. And it may be the same issue. This committee then has to take what might be 3 different answers and decide the one, then deciding to the refinement whether you'd add a comma, which changes the sentence structure, or to reuse the words shall or may. And so you can see that these contexts under which how the final bill is arrived at will have a lot of meaning and substance. We fought today over a 300-page bill that is about tax extenders for the end of the year. And this thing is full of things that have happened during the year in our country, notwithstanding storms, notwithstanding fires, tornadoes, other things that have been natural disasters. And what we're actually trying to do is to allow an extension of people to give charitable deduction to increase that, to pay for it so the communities take care of themselves rather than the federal government necessarily have to step in. Now, that's a philosophical issue. Now, you can agree or disagree with it. We added a provision.
I characterize it differently, but that's me.
And he would tell you, I had time to read the bill, and he didn't. But my point is that we also, for tax people that come in and have people that have ideas or have seen things that are tax cheats, we now give them an opportunity to be properly taken care of in the law and protected. So we do a lot of things in here that deal with tax work, and that is what we've done. So Ken, I want to thank you. I'm not a professor. I just act like one. But I want to thank you for allowing Alec to be here and for them to have a chance to come. And I'm sure you'll take them in the office and let them enjoy that too. We got a nice fire.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. As soon as the rule is reported, we will adjourn for the day, and I will take them onto the floor and give them a tour of the floor and show them where the great President of the United States will give his State of the Union address in a few weeks. And so I think they're excited about that also.
They will. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Good.
Mr. Chairman.
Anything further, sir?
All said.
Great.
Welcome.
I want to thank each of you for visiting the Rules Committee. It's my hope that you will have a chance to go back home and tell 1,000 people that you came up here and that it has helped renew a sense of not just Americanism, but some sense of spirit about our country, and to go back and sell the fight for making America to face its challenges and to make sure that no challenge is bigger than an answer. And I want to thank you for being here tonight. Okay, this completes our work for the evening. We've now reported out the rule, and so the committee's done its work. Mr. Hastings is not here to ask the question, but I will answer it for him. This is our last meeting of the week.
Thank God.
Thank you.